and Russian-English relationships. And today we're going to speak about Peter the Great and his cooperation with the English. And the subheading of today's lecture is Ships, Alliances, and Gardens. And so you will see why this subheading is appropriate to this epoch. And first, we're going to speak of the technical and professional cooperation between our two countries. And it all begins with Peter the Great's great embassy to Western Europe, in which he first of all was looking for allies against Turkey, against the Ottoman Empire. But he was on the way, he was also trying to pick up some necessary skills and professionals that could be useful inside Russia. And he was still very young. It is 1697, 1698. And he first visited some continental countries in Western Europe, like Germany, the various German micro-states. And then he also visited Holland. And then he went to England on an invitation, and he spent several months there. He was mainly located in a small town of Deptford, which is not far from London. That's where the English shipbuilding facilities were located. And he was working there almost on a daily basis, trying to ignore the diplomatic etiquette. He even ignored some invitations. He was traveling incognito. Well, he was traveling incognito under the name of Peter Mikhailov, which sort of technically made him free from various official invitations. So he could do whatever he wanted. But of course, everybody knew that he was the Tsar, and English royal persons invited him for receptions. They wined and dined him as well. But he also spent a lot of time just working with his hands, and that, of course, made a great impression on Europeans in general and on the English in particular, because he was working like an ordinary shipbuilder. And of course, he was picking up the necessary skills of how to build ships. And this is a statue of Peter the Great, which is now in Deptford in England. It was made specially, slightly disproportionately, because as you know, Peter the Great had a slightly disproportionate figure himself in life. So, I think this one is even more distorted than he was in life. Very small head, very tall, and with very long limbs. And one of the reminders of Peter's stay in England is at Tsar Street, which is also in Deptford, I think. And even is Chutney, so that's the even side of the road. There's the odd side and the even side, Tsar Street. And there is also a memorial plaque, which was which was sponsored, so far as I understand, by some Russian people. It says, Russian Tsar Peter the Great visited Godalming, a small place in England, in March 1693 and stayed overnight at the King's Arms, 1698, and stayed overnight at the King's Arms Inn. This plaque was cast and presented to citizens of Godalming by citizens of Moscow Fili district. And there are people here who live in Fili, to commemorate the tercentenary of this visit. So there's this memorial plaque. He met Newton. He also met some other famous English people. He visited the Greenwich Observatory, the Mint, the Royal Society, and so he also managed to recruit a large team of English professionals from various walks of life to come to Russia and to work. He was prepared to pay a lot of money for that. He also granted the English a monopoly in trade in tobacco. which was, of course, a great grant. The then king asked the royal portrait painter to paint a portrait of Peter by Kneller. That's a portrait of the young Peter, who is inspired by the ships and who is dressed in the Spanish armor of that time as a young, promising king, full of dignity, full of enthusiasm and inspiration, and presented it to Peter. So when Peter went away, he also brought away a lot of English professionals, and there were so many of them that there was a quarter, there was a district in St. Petersburg where those English professionals lived, and there's an English embankment in St. Petersburg. It looks like this, a very nice, neat embankment. It's called Angliskaya Nabережная because lots of English professionals and guests lived in St. Petersburg there. But actually, Peter had some foreknowledge of the English craftsmanship and the English excellence in shipbuilding even before he traveled there. So, for example, in one of Russian museums, you can find the first boat of Peter the Great. You've probably heard of that in your history lessons at school. The grandfather of the Russian fleet. I think it is in Pereslav-Zaleski. I might be mistaken, but I think it's there. And the story of this boat, St. Nicholas, is like this. That's in Russian. Since all my lectures are in English, I'll briefly summarize that in English. You can read that in Russian. So when he was walking in Izmailovo in Moscow, not far from here, he saw a foreign ship, a small foreign boat, lying in one of the warehouses. He asked what it was, and he was told that this is an English boat, which was used for sailing, for carrying cargo. And he was told that it had some advantages, technical advantages compared to Russian boats, that you can go against the wind as well as along with the wind on this boat. And he was quite surprised and liked it very much. So this grandfather of the Russian fleet was English. But of course, when he came back from his great embassy, the first category of professionals that he brought were English shipbuilders. And among them was a man called Joseph Nye, or Nye. Well, there are various spellings of his surname. He was the many years master shipbuilder to the Tsar Peter the Great. He died in the middle of the century, so he outlived Peter the Great by almost 30 years. And he stayed, most of this time he stayed in Russia. He was paid a lot of money, like all the other shipbuilders. And this is, for example, from his letter by Joseph Nye, in his letter from Voronezh. I'm likewise setting up of another of 54 guns after our English fashion, which His Majesty most admires and is ever praising of our navy. This is early modern English. So you might think that there are mistakes here, but it is just not modern English. So he was building a 54-gun ship for Peter the Great in Voronezh. And an ambassador, the British ambassador in Russia, wrote back home about the respect and about the salaries that these people got, the English professionals got here in Russia. The respect paid to them is more than they could pretend to in any other country, though they were persons of quality, for they are the most caressed, loved by the Tsar and consequently by all the great men of the kingdom. They partake of his diversions, so they take part in his entertainment, and on festival days sit at his own table, when persons of the best quality are bound to stand and wait. In short, the Tsar omits nothing that could endear himself to them or that may engage them to continue in his service during life. He also invited them very simply for get-togethers, for a drink, and of course they were much flattered and pleased by such attention on behalf of Peter. And so they built. They not only did they build the ships, but they also educated new Russian craftsmen, new Russian shipbuilders, and that was something that attracted Peter so much in the English tradition of shipbuilding, because the Dutch, who had been building ships for him before that, they didn't have strict mathematical science in their shipbuilding activity. So they try to do that like the craftsmen of old, using the rule of thumb and not using strict mathematical models. Whereas the English made plans of ships, they drew plans of ships, and there was mathematics underlying all this activity. So Peter was very much attracted by that. And that also allowed to train many more excellent Russian shipbuilders. And by the end of the 1710s, the English got nervous about Russia becoming a great naval power. They got afraid of Russia becoming a rival to the English. They were afraid that Russia would become a rival. So, for example, a British admiral, Sir John Norris, in 1715 wrote, "It is not reasonable that you should believe that his nation, by the help of some English builders, should have made the improvement we find. He has 3 new 60-gun ships built by them at St. Petersburg that are in every way equal to the best of that rank in our country, and are handsomely finished. So they're beautifully made, and they are in quality no worse than the English ships of that time." And James Jeffreys, the British envoy to St. Petersburg, the British ambassador, wrote that the Russian ships now are as good and as well built as any Europe can afford. And he also wrote this about because they wanted to get those to bring those shipbuilders back. They got afraid and they decided to return those English professionals to Britain. But of course, they were not very much willing to go. Why? And he reports why they're not so willing to go. These are people who have taken their all with them into this country, into Russia, who have no lands or tenements in Britain, and consequently nothing to lose in Great Britain. Oh, the spelling is original. They come to this country with their families to seek their fortunes, and have in some respects found the same, for their salaries are considerable, 2 of them having 2,000 rubles each per annum every year, and the other 3, 800 each, besides presents upon occasion and other advantages. And he also wrote that the Dutch shipbuilders, the best Dutch shipbuilders, salary was only as high as the worst English shipbuilders' salary. So the English shipbuilders were preferred and promoted. If you require the translation of any of these words or passages, just let me know, right? So what they do in 1719, the English Parliament passes an act of Parliament to prevent the inconveniences arising from seducing artificers in the manufactures of Great Britain into foreign parts. So they prohibit to recruit English professionals. They said that this is for all countries, but of course in this case, it is aimed against Russia. So to prevent Russia recruiting English professionals, they pass an act of Parliament prohibiting this. But the Russian, one of the Russian administrators who was disappointed with that, he wrote to the English ambassador and said, "This step is now too late. The Tsar's own subjects put them there, being able to build ships, and within time accustom themselves to the sea likewise." So he says it's too late. They have already trained Russian professionals, very good ones. So there's no use prohibiting to bring new people from England. And Joseph Noi continued to serve Russia for many years when Peter the Great died, he had one of the great honors. He was allowed to assist in carrying the coffin of Peter the Great, which of course was, you can imagine, this is a great, great honor. And then he continued to live privately and to continue to build ships here under the succeeding Russian emperors and empresses, as long as 1737. In 1737, Tsarina Anna rewards him for his long and faithful services. So he still continued to live in Russia. But before his death, shortly before his death, he asked for her permission to go back home to England. He wanted to die in his native land. So he went back and he settled in Deptford, where he first met Peter the Great 40 years before that. And he died there, and there is his grave in Deptford. So this is a big name in the history of Russian-English relationships, Joseph Nye, or Joseph Nye, who was for many years master shipbuilder to the Tsar Peter the Great. A couple of more slides related to this topic of technical cooperation, which also brings along some political developments. So as you remember, in 1719, there was this considerable deterioration, worsening of relationships between Russia and England. And England made a treaty in Wien between between England, the German emperor, and Poland. And the Russian emperor was, of course, quite unhappy. So he wrote to the English king with a reprimand, with a reproach. But the king replied that the alliance was only a protective alliance. Does it ring a bell with anything that is happening now? Right? NATO keeps telling us this is just a protective alliance. It's not an aggressive alliance against anybody. So the king replied the same thing. You shouldn't be worried. This is a protective alliance between England, Poland, and the German king, and that the king had not concluded any alliance with Sweden before that. And Sweden, of course, was what was the main adversary, the main enemy of Russia at the time. But before long, England also concluded a treaty in 1720 in Stockholm, a treaty, an agreement where the English king took on himself the responsibility, committed himself to helping the Swedish king against Russia. And of course, there were some sanctions against each other. So the English king sent the English Admiral Norris, a squadron of ships, to the Baltic Sea, and they kept sending English military ships into the Baltic every year in that period. And the Russian side also imposed some sanctions on the English merchants. For example, the English Askin, merchant by the name of Askin, whose goods were arrested until the English allowed Russian students and Russian scholars to go to England to study again. So what English imposed at that time, they initiated a moratorium, a ban on inviting Russians to England to study. And I found this piece of news, which I think brilliantly fits into this mosaic of relationships, shows you how history repeats itself. So, for example, in 2022, the British government announced restrictions in the sphere of academic and scientific cooperation with the Russian Federation. It was at that time that our university's cooperation with Nottingham University in England was suspended and, effectively terminated for the time. So the English like to stop this academic cooperation in Russia when they're unhappy about Russian behavior. But in those days, those people who, it was not only shipbuilding, of course. There were many other things. And shipbuilding itself was tightly related, as you remember, with mathematics. For example, in Sukharevo Tower, which no longer exists. It existed somewhere in the district in the vicinity of Sukharevskaya metro station, and there was this school of mathematical and shipbuilding sciences, and it was led by another British citizen, but he actually came from Scotland. There were a lot of Scottish people here, even more than English ones. And this tower was also called Sukhareva Bashня or Brusova Bashня. If I'm not confusing that with Brusov's tower, not far from here in Чистые пруды. Can you Google for that, Brusova Bashня? Was it the Sukhareva Bashня or was it the one? No. Yeah, I think I'm right. This is Sukhareva Bashня. So he was stationed here. It was his home and also the school where he taught mathematics. Jacob Bruce, he was a descendant of the great Scottish king Robert the Bruce. If you have you ever seen Braveheart, the film, The Braveheart, about Scottish War of Independence against the English? No? Yeah, Braveheart. That's a famous film. If you haven't seen it, I advise you to see it. It has nothing to do with Russian-British relationships. It's just between England and Scotland. But Robert the Bruce, this is a screenshot from the film. His descendant, Potomac, was Jacob Bruce, and he lived here in Russia. He taught mathematics, and he was a great companion and assistant to Peter the Great. And there is also Brusov Pereulok in Moscow, not far from Охотный Ряд metro station. That's where his headquarters were located. His home was also located. Brusov Pereulok. Now, some more facts and things about politics. As you see, politics is everywhere, even in these technical cooperation issues. So under Peter the Great, things started very well, but then they sort of worsened towards the end of his rule, because the English, and in this case we have to mention this, the worsening of relationships started on the part of the English, first of all. They got afraid, they got envious of the Russian success, and started to become wary of new competitors. So, but under the new under the new empresses, the relationships also followed the same trajectory, so to speak. So, if we drop Tsarina Anna and speak of Empress Elizabeth, who was, of course, a great epoch in herself in Russian history. She also began with a very good note. In 1734, they concluded a trade agreement with England, which allowed the English to trade again in Russia and gave them benefits and grants. And then in 1741, they even signed a protective alliance, which Elizabeth had been looking for. But that didn't work very well in the new Russian war against Prussia. You probably remember from school this seven-year war with Prussia, and there were alliances on both sides, and Russia was in the alliance against Prussia, but England became an ally of Prussia against Russia, and you see that the trajectory was the same. We begin on a very high note, but then it sort of all goes downhill. And well, the next page in the relationships between Russia and England came when Elizabeth was already in her last years. It was evident that she was going to die soon, and her success on the Russian throne was to be Peter III, right? III, whose wife was Catherine II, the future Catherine II. And England didn't want Peter on the throne, on the Russian throne. Why? Because Peter III was a great lover of Prussia. And England at that time didn't want Prussia to become too strong. So the English ambassador, Sir Charles Williams, he was a very clever man. And he saw that Catherine was a very promising young lady. He saw the potential in her. And if you remember, Catherine was, in a way, she was not in very favorable conditions when Elizabeth was still alive. So, for example, Elizabeth didn't rank Catherine very highly. So when Catherine gave birth to her child, the child was taken away to Elizabeth. And generally, she didn't get a lot of money. And Catherine, being a very ambitious young princess, she wasn't very happy about this. So how can you entreat yourself, endear yourself to a young and ambitious young lady? You should give her money. And this is what Charles Williams was doing. He was giving her money when she was still the wife of the successor to the throne. And he wrote very nice letters to her saying that she was very sober, very savvy. She was equal to Richelieu and Molière. She was born to reign and to command other people. And she was talented by nature and by her own diligence to be the first figure in the world. And let me find some more passages about this. He wrote, what else did he write? Yeah, and the Empress was also quite happy about this, and she wrote that when she gained the throne, when she became the Empress, she wrote to him, "I will never forget what I owe to you, and I want to reward you. I will be trying to find various ways to direct Russia at what I find the most beneficial and profitable for her, and this is to be tightly connected with England." But of course, when she was still a princess, when she was not the Empress, she was doing other things. So she got the money, but she also told him some sensitive pieces of information. That was not all for free. So she gave the English ambassador some sort of basically spy information, inside information that they needed. But when she became the Empress, she was fully in her heart pursuing the interests of the Russian Empire. But she saw the interests of the Russian Empire lying in close collaboration with the English. And she also had quite a lot of English at her court. She wrote in one of her private letters that I am so much used to the friendship of the English that I look at each one of them as it's somebody who wishes me well, and I act as far as it depends on me in accordance with this. So one of the people who had close access to Catherine the Great was a doctor, Dr. Thomas Dimmesdale. We know very little of him generally, but he was quite a figure. In 1766, you remember there was a tradition of inviting English doctors to Russia. And this guy, he invented a way to vaccinate people against smallpox, OSPA. And as you remember, vaccination was a new thing in those days. Basically, You allowed people to put the germs into your body. And we are still quite, we're still sometimes quite wary of vaccination, right? Because it is still quite a mysterious thing. And of course, in those days, such methods of treatment were very, very suspicious. But Catherine, she was very much open-minded in terms of science. So when she studied the evidence that this vaccination was reasonably safe, and she wanted to pioneer the way for her subjects, for her people, to protect them against smallpox, which of course was a great plague, a great disaster for countries at that time. She decided to subject herself to an experiment, to vaccination. But she knew that it could go wrong. So just in case, she prepared a coach, carrieta, she prepared a coach, a vehicle, for Dimmesdale to be rushed away from the palace if she died. Because she knew that if she died, the doctor would be killed. You can understand, right? So she prepared a way for him to escape. She was a very, very just participant of an experiment. But so Dr. Dimmesdale vaccinated her, and he wrote in his diary, she has had the smallpox in the most desirable manner, a moderate number of pustules, this thing that appears on the skin, and complete maturation, which now, thank God, is over. And I find an inexpressible load of concern removed from my heart. So that was a triumph. That was a triumph. Catherine announced to everyone that this is a new way to protect yourself against smallpox. And that, of course, played a great role in scientific research and in the public reception of scientists and medicine here in Russia. And Dimmesdale, of course, was rewarded very much. There was a celebration. There was an allegorical theater play staged, which was called The Triumph Over Superstition. And that, of course, made English professionals even more desirable, even more welcome here. And Baroness Dimmesdale, the wife of the doctor, wrote about the Empress. The Empress is very much disposed towards the British, and I am of the same opinion, because I saw many Englishmen who were in her service. Her doctor, Dr. Rogerson, and the governor of Kronstadt, Admiral Craig, who takes care of all ships. Governor of Riga, General Brown. Two ladies who are raising young princes, Alexander and Constantine. So you can, there was this passion for English governesses, to bring English governesses to bring up Russian children. So they got largely a British upbringing. Gardener, Mr. John Bush. Don't you think this is a very appropriate surname for a gardener? Artist, Mr. Brampton. Architect, Mr. Carl Cameron. Watchmaker, Mr. Heinem. They are all English. So you see that this cooperation between Russia and England flourishes and thrives at this time due to Catherine's interest and fascination by all things British. However, clouds start to gather over the Russian-British relationships, inevitably. Why? Do you remember that there is this tradition going back to Tsar Ivan Grozny, that the British don't want political alliances with Russia. They just don't want to get involved. But what they do want from Russia is trade relationships. They want preferences, they want benefits, and preferences for their merchants here in Russia. This is what benefits them most. Russia, on the other hand, doesn't have a strong fleet. And these trade relationships are not so important for them. Why? Because Russia has so much here that it doesn't, well, it does need foreign goods, but it's quite okay with what we have. So it's not vital. What Russia wants is political alliances. It wants help. It wants protection because it is threatened on many sides. Well, in the south, there is still the Ottoman Empire. Don't forget, the Crimea is still occupied by, it's still the territory of the Ottoman Empire, or rather of the allies of the Ottoman Empire. All of current Moldavia and Serbia and all these countries, this is still the Ottoman Empire, and much of today's Ukraine. Then there is a strong adversary in the person of Poland. Germany is quite hostile. Sweden is still hostile. So Russia has a lot of enemies, and it does want some political support and assistance. So what Catherine was trying to get from the English was this, but the English didn't want to get involved. So in 1766, and then slightly later, there were two trade alliances. So the English pushed their line, and Catherine reluctantly agreed. She agreed that, okay, let's have a trade alliance. And although, the British said that those conditions that Catherine wanted tend solely to the benefits of Russia without any reciprocity for England. So Catherine said, okay, if you don't want a political alliance, let it be a trade alliance, which was, of course, only for the benefits, well, largely for the benefits of the English, not of Russia. But then comes 1775, when the War of Independence broke out in North America, and the United States were in the making. The United States were being born at the time. And then, surprise, surprise, King George III turns to Catherine for military assistance. He said, okay, we want a political alliance with you. We want a military alliance with you. Help us to pacify the American rebels. Please send Russian troops, 20, 30,000 soldiers to the New World, to America, and we're going to give you a full political alliance, a full military alliance as well. But this time, Catherine refused herself. So what she did, she said no. And the United States were born because of this. Well, largely because of this. We never know. Maybe they would have gained independence even without the Russian troops. But you can imagine that if the English could bring 20 or 30,000 Russian soldiers to America, that would be a considerable force as well. And George Washington wrote in a letter to Lafayette in the spring of 1779, "We are not a little pleased to learn from a reliable source that the requests and offers of Great Britain to the Russian emperors were rejected in contempt." And the British were offended. They didn't like this. They didn't like this. So when Catherine asked them for help, they said no, just business. When they asked Catherine for help and she said no, just business, but they were very much offended. And they started to harass Russian ships, Russian merchant ships, which carried goods to America, because Russia had some trade with the American colonies. It was quite beneficial for Russia as well. And the British started to harass the merchant ships of various European nations who were trading with the American rebels. Why? Because it was important for the trade was important for the United States, for the future United States. So what does Catherine propose? So, for example, in 1778, English pirates capture several ships with cargo on the way to Arkhangelsk. So they start to use their naval power, their mighty fleet, to pirate on merchant ships. What does Catherine propose? She proposes a great political, diplomatic alliance of the time. She proposes in 1780 the Treaty of Armed Neutrality, Вооруженный нейтралитет, saying okay, those countries who don't want to side with Great Britain or with the United States, we're not going to provide a military alliance to either of them. If you want, you can fight between yourselves. But we want to preserve our trade with both of you. So she said, okay, let us protect our ships together, our merchant ships, right? So they decided to send military squadrons, military ships, to accompany merchant ships in the Atlantic and in other seas. And she concluded this armed neutrality pact with Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, Prussia, Austria, Portugal, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. That was a great European alliance, in fact, against England. They didn't fight against the English, but they protected their ships against English pirates. So the Russian Navy was dispatched 3 squadrons, 3 escadre, to the Mediterranean, to the Atlantic and North Sea to enforce this decree to protect Russian ships. And not only Russian, also Dutch, also Danish and Swedish and so on and so forth. And of course, the English regarded that as a hostile act. They were very much unhappy. And this is a Dutch caricature of the English. The English, well, that's England in the middle. And these are the other countries this is a caricature on this armed neutrality pact. Some people are taking away the clothes of England, of the English king. Some are tearing away the shirt. Somebody is taking off the crown. And on the right, you have a Russian muzhik, right? A bearded gentleman in a fur hat with a stick, who is ready to strike England on the head. This is what how the Dutch portrayed this with the club, yeah, with the big stick, portrayed this armed neutrality pact. And well, for example, this is a memorial medal which was minted to commemorate the 1780 Armed Neutrality Pact, which the other European countries welcomed very much because they also suffered from the English pirates. So they liked this initiative and they helped Catherine to promote it. And here it says, Tsarina Magna Mare Libertum, the free sea, right? The seas must be free from pirates. And of course, that generated hostility towards Russia and fear of Russia in the English government. And when Russia when Russia was approaching a war with the Ottoman Empire, with Turkey, the English, of course, were thinking how to help Turkey. And here comes onto stage a very prominent Russian statesman, the Russian ambassador to England. He is really a name, and I think he is worth to be remembered, worth being remembered. The Earl Semyon Romanovich Vorontsov. Let's remember his name, and the dynasty of Vorontsov is well, the name of the statesman is spelled big in the history of Russia in general. So he was a great Anglophile. So being a Russian patriot very much, he was also a great Anglophile. He liked England, and he thought that the best interest of England lay not in confrontation with Russia, but rather in cooperation and collaboration with Russia. So when the Russian-Turkish War of 1787 to 92 began, the English Prime Minister at the time was William Pitt the Jr. And he was very much anti-Russian. So he decided to threaten Russia that if Russia went to war with Turkey, England would side with Turkey and would attack Russia. So he was trying to bring this into Parliament. He was trying to bring this into politics, that Britain would threaten a war with Russia. But Earl Semyon Vorontsov tried to reason with him. He tried to speak to him and say, look, this is not in the best interest of England. But Pitt the Jr., William Pitt the Jr. didn't want to hear. And then what Vorontsov does was a great tour de force of diplomacy. He said, okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to speak directly to the English society. They know where the best interests of England are. So he decided to speak to the opposition in Parliament, which was led by Charles Fox. And this is a bust of Charles Fox, which Catherine II later commissioned to make. And Charles the Fox spoke in Parliament very passionately, and he said that, let me find the let me find this, what he said. Where is this? Just say, I'm sorry. Oh, come on. Where is this? Bless you. Come on. Can't find it. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. That's when you can't find information in your own writing. Well, anyway, he said that the Russian-English trade relationships were much more important than the English support to the Turks. He said, we import from Russia goods every year at the cost of around 1,000 pounds, and then maybe 2,000 pounds each year. And of course, the pound was much more costly at that time. And we also export a lot of goods to Russia, and it's so very important for us. And he managed to persuade the parliament, but Vorontsov also turned to the newspapers. He said to Pitt, if you do not stop your anti-Russian policies, I will speak directly to the newspapers, and I'm sure that the people will not support your policy. And that's what he did. He spoke to the newspapers, and they started to write, and there were a lot of people who spoke against the English intervention into the Russian-Turkish war. So Pitt the Jr. had to back down. And that helped, of course, Russia to win this Russian-Turkish war. So what Catherine II wrote about Charles Fox, that by his elocution, by his speeches, he managed to save his native country and Russia from a senseless and a very unjust war. So they prevented a war by purely diplomatic efforts. And I think this is just brilliant, shows you how much can be done if you're a skillful diplomat. And so Catherine commissioned a bust of Charles Fox in a classic manner, and she put it in her own gallery between Cicero and another great Greek or Roman orator, speaker. Oh, yeah, I was looking for this quotation. It's here on my, I'm sorry, guys. The quotation here is on my slide. That's what Fox said. Our trade with Russia has always been most beneficial. our export to Russia went up to 2 million pounds. And our import is 1 million pounds. Then we also gain a lot from taxes. And there are 350 ships are engaged in this trade. And most of them, with the exception of 3 or 4, they are British. And he was asking, is it sensible to disrupt such trade? So he was very convincing, and he was quite right. And that saved England from a war with Russia. And this is a caricature in the conservative anti-Russian newspaper, which showed Catherine, and this is where the origins of anti-Russian propaganda in English begin, or rather continue. This is Catherine killing the Turkish Sultan. And this is Catherine, who is very modern. She's trying to conquer new lands. She's trying to attack and get new lands for herself. And of course, these are ironic captions: justice, moderation. This is love, and instead of that, there is a noose for hanging. And this is this bust of Charles Fox between Demosthenes and Cicero. And well, of course, this all mocks Catherine. Vorontsov stayed in England for life. So even when he stopped being an ambassador, he decided not to return to Russia. He decided to stay in England. So he got a house there, and where he lived, there is still a Vorontsov road to commemorate this Vorontsov who lived there. But he also was a donor. He was a philanthropist. So with some of his funds, he was quite a rich man. You can imagine he was an earl. So part of his funds he bequeathed, he left to the poor people of St. Mary-le-Bone district, and he built this almshouse. This almshouse, Bogadelnya, it was built with the funds that he donated, and that's where it's located in Vorontsov Road, St. Mary-le-Bone almshouse. So this is his legacy, a great legacy of preventing this war between England and Russia, but also a great legacy well, some legacy even in architecture. So if we look again at this, at all of these periods of Russian rulers, you will see the same trajectory. We begin on a very high note under Peter the Great, then it falls down. We begin with a trade treaty and good relationships under Anne and Elizabeth, goes down to our being enemies in the Russian-Prussian War. We begin on a very enthusiastic, very lovable note under Catherine II, when the English are everywhere. Russians are fascinated by the English. But politically, it all deteriorates into almost a war towards the end of Catherine's reign. And then we'll see in our next lecture that under Emperor Paul, Catherine's son, it all follows the same trajectory. And the curious thing that this pattern is followed still in modern history. If you remember Vladimir Putin's, or you don't remember, but if you look, I remember, but we'll look at that in our future lectures. But it follows the same pattern. There is a photo which you see on the front page of our website that I showed you, Russian-English Relationships, MCPU, where Putin is sitting in the same carriage with Elizabeth II. That was a visit of Putin to England. So it all began on a very high, very promising, very optimistic note, and see where our relationships have come towards the end. And I think it is very interesting for us to analyze why this pattern reproduces itself in centuries. It's very interesting, philosophically and historically. It's not a riddle. I think it's quite transparent, but it's still something that we should think of. Why? But now we'll speak of something else. We'll begin. I think maybe I should stop this recording so that the video is not as heavy as it will get if I continue now. So let me terminate this one. And since we still have time, I'll continue that immediately again.